Catholic traditions you have never heard of. This is Dive Deep. From the Diocese of Springfield in Illinois, this is Dive Deep, where we dive deep into our Catholic faith. I am Andrew Hansen, here with Father Chris House. You are our resident history buff. You love church history. Were you a history major?
Yes.
What
philosophy?
Philosophy. What kind of history in particular?
Then it was not American, so more European.
Or you are a European kind of guy. So we thought, what better way than to look back on our church history than to look at Catholic traditions you never heard of. And so we got 7 of them. Father House is going to break this all down. There's a lot on this list that I think I kind of laugh at. I'm like, oh, maybe we should bring that back too. All right, so first things out of the
some people heard of some of these. It's just they've fallen out of use in some places, and the younger generations will have no idea of them. But some of our listeners of some seasoning will have experienced a few of these.
Well, the first one out of the gate cracks me up, and I have never heard of this, but pastors keeping the Christmas collection.
Well, and not anymore. Not here. And in fact, it's really, that was, in this country, I think more, if anywhere, it was up in the Northeast. So
how long ago was this a thing?
I think in some places it may have been actually within the last 100 years.
Really?
Now, it used to be, though, and in some places in Europe, I believe it is still the case. But the whole idea of keeping the Christmas collection was, though, that was in lieu of getting a salary, or that was your sustenance for the year. It wasn't like you got a paycheck and the Christmas collection.
Do the people know that the paycheck or their collection went to the pastor?
Then I think so, yeah.
So he may.
In fact, I actually came across an article. This was just a year or two ago. I think it was the Diocese of. It was over in Ireland. I forget the name of the diocese, but their priests are paid basically by 3 collections. There's 3 different envelopes of the year, and they were having problems because those weren't working out, and so they were having to do some other things. So yeah, but no, I remember hearing about that in some places, the All Souls collection or the Easter collection. It just depended. So, but that has. As far as I know, has never been a practice in our diocese, and really not in the United States.
That's very interesting. Okay, our second one is slapping for confirmation. Now, what is this all about?
Well, some Catholics will remember that. So, I mean, it's not, when we say slapping, I think we like to think something more about it than what it was. Basically, it was the bishop would
lightly
tug you
tap
on the cheek.
Okay.
Yeah. Because there used to be this notion of confirmation that you were now a soldier for Christ. So you had to be willing to accept the slaps of the world and of disfortune in that. And so, but no, that custom is not in the current rite of the sacrament of confirmation. I was confirmed in 1989, and
you didn't get slapped.
No.
There's now the bishop just shakes the young person's hand, or if you're later the adult. Do you remember how long ago that tradition, like when that faded out?
The reforms about the Second Vatican Council, as the different rites were reformed. So I'm guessing that would have. Now, I mean, today, if confirmation is done according to the 62 or the rites before the Second Vatican Council, which sometimes they are, that is still done.
That's one thing when I heard it. Okay, there's also we're a little more people with germs and that sort of stuff. Like we're a little more I guess a little more dicey about that these days. But what you just said is actually kind of like, again, there's so much richness and symbolism of the Catholic faith, and the slapping, you're a soldier for Christ. So you're going out into the world and you're going to get beaten up, but you got the Holy Spirit with you now, so you can take the beat down because you're going to, you're a soldier for Christ. There's something about that though. Like when you hear about that, you're like, oh, that's actually kind of cool. And all these just rich symbols of the Catholic faith. Okay, number 3. I think this is definitely making a comeback. Veiling for women.
Right.
What is the symbolism behind that?
Yeah, I actually kind of looked this up because I knew some of it, but the biggest part was this notion of modesty, which is interesting though, because this is a departure. Because in Judaism, it's men who veil when they would go into the temple, when they go to pray. So they put up their prayer shawl. And to this day will cover their heads like at the Western Wall in Jerusalem. In our tradition, it was that women would veil as a sign of modesty. For some, it was an emulation of the Blessed Mother, because we always picture Mary with a veil. And for others, it could show your marital status. So women who are married would wear a black veil or a mantilla, and women who are not married, who had not been married, would wear a white one. So, or sometimes, and it depends on kind of the cultural thing. It wasn't always necessarily a lace veil or a chapel veil or a mantilla. It could be a hat, but a woman would cover her head, even to the point that I know women would talk about, I didn't have my hat, I didn't have my veil, so I had to put a Kleenex on my head. Huh. That was kind of the fallback. If you didn't have something, they would put a Kleenex on their head and with a bobby pin or something.
Now, see, I've also heard you veil things that are, you're setting them aside because they're holy. You think of them as, profoundly. And so that was another thing I thought about. That was said by one of the canons over at St. Catherine Drexel Parish when I talked to him. That was one of the reasons he gave. So it was kind of funny. It's like, hey, see, women, we actually think of you as more holy, and we're setting you aside versus the men, which I thought was kind of an interesting take as well. Are you seeing more women at your parish or out and about in the diocese? Is this kind of a slow trend coming back?
I don't know really I don't know if I would say it has reappeared. I don't know where it is in that, if it's on the rise, if it's kind of holding steady or that. But no, it definitely, you do see it from time to time.
But again, it's one of those things, again, when you learn about why women are, have veils, it's, again, very rich, very cool.
And a lot of it, you can also find it with culture too. With different cultures within the church, you may see it more or less.
Okay. All right. Our fourth one, Catholic traditions you've never heard of. Now, if you're a listener of Dive Deep, you should know about this one. But in case you didn't catch that podcast, is no meat on Fridays. And we're not talking about Lent. We're talking about all Fridays. Walk us through the history of this. But there's a caveat if you do want to eat meat on Fridays.
Right. So the church before Vatican II, and I want to say this was may have actually been Pope Pius XII. I don't have the actual year. I want to say it's in the 50s, though, Pius XII. I could be wrong. But I do know this. But meatless Fridays are still the law of the church, that we do not eat meat on Fridays. That was not done away with. What was allowed was that you could eat meat if you did some type of penitential practice in exchange, whether that be praying the Stations of the Cross, meditating on the sorrowful mysteries of the Holy Rosary, whatever that might be, some type of penitential practice. But it was not just not eating meat on Fridays was simply wiped away. Now, just a few years ago, the bishops of England and Wales went away from the permission to do a penitential act in exchange and simply went back to every Friday was a meatless Friday in England and Wales. So you can eat meat on Fridays outside of Lent, but it is to be done in exchange with doing some type of penitential act, some type of penitential practice.
And knowing this now, if you don't do that, that's a sin.
Technically, yes.
Okay. We don't want to sin. Okay. Number 5, 40 hours of devotion. This is another thing I've seen a couple parishes in our diocese pop up doing this, but back in the day, this was a thing.
Right. And this is before my time. I was born in 76, so I did not grow up with any type of 40 hours devotion. Now, there was a time when every parish, I would argue, would do 40 hours devotion at least once a year.
And really quick, 40 hours devotion, what does that look like?
So you're looking, basically, it's 40 hours of exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. And Mass could be celebrated within that time, too. But it was 40 hours focused intently on the Eucharist. And it was 40 straight hours. And so, but it was a big thing. People would come. There would be talks would be given in the evening. A lot of times you would invite a neighboring pastor or another priest to come in. And usually, I think it was on the last night, the clergy from the area would come, priests would come. A lot of times the pastor would host a dinner, and then they would go over for the talk that was given, or the homily that was given, the benediction that was given, processions, things like that. So 40 hours was a very big devotional practice up until, I'd say, the 1960s. It has begun to reappear. I know the cathedral has done it. Other parishes I know have done it. Sometimes a parish will not do 40 hours straight. They will do 40 hours, but they will stop it in the late evening and then reconvene early in the morning because for different concerns of safety or security or things like that. But it is beginning to reappear.
Do you have to have, if a parish were to do it, does they have to have everyone, someone has to be there? Is that
right?
Like,
anytime the Eucharist is exposed, someone must be in adoration.
Okay. So that's interesting to know because, yeah, I mean, because what you just said, I'm wondering why maybe some parishes aren't doing it as much because, again, finding people to do the shifts of midnight to 5 a.m. could be difficult, but I didn't know you could technically cut it off and continue.
Yes.
So that's interesting. Okay, number 6 on our list, the enthronement of the Sacred Heart in people's homes. I have no idea what this is, never heard of this one.
It's the custom is still around. Sadly, it's not as popular as it was, but literally the enthronement of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So what would happen is you would ask your priest to come. It doesn't have to be a priest, but the tradition has always been encouraged for a priest to do it, is to come, and there's an actual ritual, a ceremony of enthronement. So a place of honor in the home. Maybe it's above the mantle or it's on a specific wall. And then there would be usually a table put underneath with a white cloth and candles, and the image would be nearby of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And then the image was solemnly enthroned in the home, on the wall, on the shelf, wherever it was going to go. And basically what was being said is that family is making a statement that in this house, Christ is king. Christ reigns. His kingdom is firmly established here in our hearts, our lives, in this home. And by putting this image of the Sacred Heart in a prominent place, all who came into that house then knew that Christ reigns here. So this is the tradition. And sometimes, too, people would also then put an image of the Immaculate Heart of Mary in there as well, because Mary seeks to point us to her Son. Through her prayers, through her example, Mary seeks to lead us to Christ, her Son.
When did this kind of fade out?
Once again, I think it kind of culturally, sadly, we see a lot of these things start to disappear in the 60s and 70s. But many of these things, I mean, they kind of reappear. They're starting to kind of rise again in different places, yeah.
Do you in your priestly ministry, have you found blessing of homes, and you getting more calls when people move into a new house? Like, is that tradition coming back at all? It
kind of depends. I mean, it's in different assignments. It kind of, every parish has its own culture, and so some places it's been more so than others in that. So usually I get a phone call when people think there's something odd going on in their house, not because they just want it blessed outright.
Well,
so.
I will admit, when you came and blessed my home when we moved into a new home, I was I obviously really appreciated it, but too, it was more involved than I thought, which was another deeper appreciation for me. You know, at first I thought it was going to be, you know, you'll sprinkle some holy water around and maybe say some few words, but it was like a several minute thing. And you went to different rooms, and it wasn't just like a, hey, I'm going to throw some holy water, and that kind of represents me blessing the whole house. Like, you know, you went from room to room, and I thought that was really, really profound. Okay, the last one on our list is the Epiphany blessing. All right. What's going on here with this old tradition?
Now that's a home blessing. Now, for those who know me, know that this is probably my favorite feast after Christmas. Ever since I was a little kid, I have a devotion to the Magi. Whoever they were, however many they were, we have our traditions that say there were 3 of them because of the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So what the Epiphany blessing is that at the beginning of the new year, which happens at the same time, there is this old custom, and it can be done by a priest, a deacon, be done by somebody at home. So because we're asking God to render the blessing. So simply, a piece of chalk is blessed, and with that piece of blessed chalk, above the main door of the house or all the door frames, what is written is, so say we did it this past January. So with the blessed chalk, we would write 20, cross, C, cross, M, cross, B, cross 23. Okay, so the year, and then CMB, Caspar, Melchior, Balthazar, by tradition the names of the Magi, but in Latin, CMB is Christus Mansione Benedicatus, Christ bless his house. So
that's interesting. Was there an old tradition at all, like at Passover, like Catholics would do chalk or anything like that? Maybe.
Well, back in the day, it was the blood of the lamb.
I know it was the blood of the, because I swear I remember as a kid we did something with red chalk to symbolize the red blood, the blood of the lamb, and we did something because at Passover they smeared it on their doors.
That I don't know of.
Maybe we had an old Catholic tradition that.
And my Latin on that may have been very off, but that was the gist of it. So yeah. So.
What do you love about like why did the three wise men?
I don't know. It's just always been something neat. Because one thing about with Epiphany, it shows that God has not come for just one people. God has come for everybody, because the Magi were not of the house of Israel. They were pagans. And so the whole thing is that through the Magi, God has chosen to reveal himself to everyone, that his love, his mercy, and his life are for everyone, not just for a select few. So there's the universality of the Feast of Epiphany, of God's goodness, and just the kind of the mystery of who are these sainted travelers who, I mean, I was just in Petra in Jordan this summer, and down there there's actually Father Dwight Longnecker wrote a book on the Magi just a couple years ago, and when I was at Petra, they talked about it, and he talks about it, that actually the Magi came from down there, because that was the frankincense and myrrh roots went through Petra, and not actually coming from ancient Persia, modern day Iran. So who knows? There's tons of stuff out there. It's all fascinating. So.
Father Christos, 7 Catholic traditions you have never heard of. That's good stuff. Some good traditions there. I know some of them are making some appearances back around our diocese and the world. Father House, good to see you. Thanks for coming on Dive Deep. For more podcasts, head over to dio.org/podcast. And until next time, we'll see you right here on Dive Deep.